way.
So where do we even start?
Well, there's this diagram you send of a world federation.
Oh, yeah. With the world government world court.
Right, and it's surprisingly detailed. Like, China gets 187 delegates in the parliament. The U.S. has 48. Japan gets 18. It's like someone spent some serious time world building here.
It's giving very much sim world, but with real stakes.
Right, but that's what's fascinating. It reflects a very real desire that's out there for some kind of global governance. When you think about the challenges we're facing that just don't stop at borders, like climate change, economic instability, even potential conflicts.
Right.
This idea of a world government, it's really about trying to find solutions together instead of each nation just fending for itself.
It's a bold vision, for sure. I mean, you highlighted some sources that talk about needing a uniform international constitution and even like establishing a World Government Institute. It's like they've already skipped ahead to the implementation phase.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how do we get from where we are now with the UN and, treaties and all of that to a full-blown world government?
Yeah, because it feels like a pretty big leap.
It is a big leap. And some of your sources are definitely trying to figure out how to make that leap happen.
Speaking of making it happen, there are these mentions of a World Party shadow cabinet and World Party Federation branches managers.
Right.
It's giving me like preparing for world domination vibes.
Yeah.
But with more meetings, I guess.
Well, what's interesting there is that proactive element. It suggests that there are organized groups out there who are actively developing these models for a world government. They're advocating for their vision and maybe even like laying the groundwork for a future transition.
So it's not just a bunch of folks sitting around theorizing.
Not necessarily, no. It seems like some are really trying to make this a reality.
Okay, well, let's get into some of the specifics here. You flagged this concept of future markets, which seems to be connected to this whole idea of a cultural inheritance of society.
Right.
Now, I like to think I'm pretty well read, but this is a new one for me.
Yeah, this one's a bit out there. It comes from this economist named C.H. Douglas. And it really challenges how we think about wealth and economics in general.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay, so imagine if all the knowledge, the techniques, the inventions throughout history, imagine if all of that wasn't just stuff we learn, but a shared inheritance belonging to everyone.
So instead of just, benefiting from the invention of the internet like we all do, we'd actually be entitled to a piece of the pie because it's part of our collective cultural inheritance.
Exactly. Douglas argued that this shared inheritance, it should actually influence our economic systems, potentially even justify something like a universal basic income.
Hold on, so you're saying just for existing, for being part of the human race that created all this stuff, I could get like a dividend?
That was the idea.
Okay, I gotta say, I'm starting to see the appeal of this cultural inheritance thing, but how do you even put a price tag on centuries of knowledge and innovation? That seems impossible.
That's where things get really interesting. Your sources also highlight cryptocurrency blockchain technology and even a proposal for a world cryptocurrency sovereign wealth fund. It's like they're envisioning a whole new financial system to go with this world government idea.
So we're talking about a global digital currency potentially managed by this world government.
It's a possibility, and it raises a ton of questions.
That's a massive shift. I mean, what would that even look like in practice?
Well, think about the potential. A single global currency could simplify global trade, make international aid more efficient, maybe even help level the playing field between countries with vastly different economic power.
Okay, I see the appeal, but could it actually work?
Well, there are huge challenges too, of course.
Yeah.
Convincing every nation to agree on a single system and to give up control over their own currencies, that's a big one.
Yeah, that's no small feat. And then on top of all that, there's this whole other layer of, well, faith. One of your sources mentions faith-based diplomacy, and there's a quote from a rabbi talking about preparing the world for a messianic age. It seems like some people see a spiritual dimension to this whole world government thing.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of complexity. It's a good reminder that these ideas about a world government, they're not just political or economic for some people. They're tied to deeper beliefs, prophecies, even a sense of destiny.
So we've got a potential structure for a world government, some radical new economic ideas, and even a touch of spiritualism. I'm starting to realize this is way more complicated than just redrawing some borders on a map.
Oh yeah, this is about reimagining how society itself functions, who we are to each other, how we share resources. It's a lot to unpack.
That's an understatement.
And maybe even messier, because you're dealing with real people, real histories, beliefs,
Yeah.
different ideas about what a good future even looks like.
Right, and that's where the challenges come in, right? I mean, one source mentions this need for a global constitution, but then it's like, yeah, no timeline for that because, natural evolvement and development of society. It's
Yeah.
like saying, sure, world peace would be great, but let's not rush into anything.
It's that tension between idealism and, the actual practicality of it all. Like, even if we all woke up tomorrow and decided a world government was the goal, getting everyone on board at the same pace, good luck. It's like herding cats. But the cats are entire nations with, nuclear weapons.
And speaking of different beliefs, there's this legal document from Israel, by the way, fascinating stuff. It talks about the limitations of their own Declaration of Independence and the role of judges in upholding Torah commandments.
Right.
So does that throw a wrench in this whole secular world government idea?
It raises a huge question. How do different legal systems, especially those rooted in religious law, how would they exist within a world government? Could you have a universal legal framework alongside, say, Sharia law or halakha? Or would it inevitably lead to conflicts?
Right. Like, could a world government even function without stepping on the toes of some pretty deeply held beliefs and traditions? Or would it end up being a way to impose one set of values on everyone?
And that's a huge concern for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
You highlighted some sources that are really worried about nations wanting to hold on to their own peace policy, resisting any external restraints that clash with their own, social cohesion, ethos, myths, and idea.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, we all want peace, but not if it means we have to sacrifice what makes us us.
Exactly. So is a world government even possible if countries aren't willing to compromise on some level? Like, what about deeply held beliefs, national identities?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you find that balance between respecting cultural diversity and creating a system that actually functions on a global scale?
Yeah.
The sources you sent seem to be wrestling with that very dilemma.
Okay, so let's talk about some potential solutions here. You mentioned e-democracy as a possibility. Could technology help bridge that gap between a world government and the people it governs?
It's an interesting idea for sure. Imagine a world where, instead of just voting every few years, citizens can directly participate in global policy debates, vote on issues, hold their leaders accountable in real time.
It's like a global town hall, but online.
Exactly. And some of your sources suggest that technology like blockchain could make that kind of system more transparent, more responsive than traditional government.
It's a fascinating thought, but it also feels like we're building the plane while we're flying it,
Definitely a work in progress, but it highlights how these big ideas are forcing us to rethink how we do, well, pretty much everything.
Okay, so let's take a step back for a second and unpack some of these economic ideas a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned C.H. Douglas and this radical concept of cultural inheritance.
Right.
Give me the ELI 5 version of this. How would that actually play out in a world government scenario?
Okay, so imagine a world where from the moment you're born, you're entitled to a share of the wealth that's been generated by all the knowledge and innovation that humanity has accumulated, like a global trust fund. But instead of money, it's built on the idea that everyone deserves to benefit from our collective genius.
So we're all born millionaires, but in knowledge capital instead of cash.
That's the general idea.
Okay, I like where this is going. But wouldn't that completely upend the existing economic order?
Oh, absolutely. Douglas believed that recognizing this cultural inheritance should fundamentally change how we think about wealth, who creates it, how it's distributed. He was writing at a time when automation was starting to replace human labor. And he argued that we needed a new system, one where everyone benefits from increased productivity, not just a select few.
Which brings us back to that world cryptocurrency sovereign wealth fund. It's like these ideas are all connected. Are they suggesting that this fund would be the way to distribute the cultural inheritance dividend?
It's a possibility. Imagine a decentralized digital currency managed by this world government, used to distribute a universal basic income, funded by this collective wealth generated by our shared knowledge and technological advancements. It's a huge departure from traditional economics, for sure.
No kidding. But your sources seem to be suggesting that a radical shift like that might be necessary in a world that's governed on a global scale.
Right. It's not business as usual anymore.
That's for sure. This is definitely a lot to wrap my head around. I gotta say, this deep dive is starting to feel less like a political science lecture and more like a sci-fi novel.
And I think that's part of what makes it so compelling. We're talking about reimagining not just our political systems, but our whole relationship with work wealth, even what it means to be human in a globally interconnected society. These sources aren't just proposing policies, they're painting a picture of a radically different future and asking us if we're ready for it. It's exciting stuff. But even with the most utopian sci-fi, you got to ask what could go wrong. And to be fair, your sources do that too.
Yeah, there's this acknowledgement that a world government could become like this tool for oppression. Bureaucracy gone wild. It's like, be careful what you wish for. You might get a global DMV line.
Right, and some of your sources address that directly.
Mm.
They emphasize things like checks and balances, transparency,
Yeah.
really robust systems of accountability to prevent that kind of thing.
So it's not just about creating a world government, it's about building in safeguards from the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make sure that power doesn't get consolidated in the hands of a few. Even if those few are theoretically representing the whole world, they talk about things like independent judiciaries, citizen oversight committees, ways to keep the world government in check.
Finding that balance between a central authority that can actually, tackle global issues, and then local autonomy, so people don't feel like they've lost all control over their lives.
Exactly.
Uh,
It's like you might want a global thermostat for climate change,
yeah,
but you still want to be able to adjust the temperature in your own house, right?
makes sense. And I gotta say, some of the solutions they propose are pretty out there, like this whole e-democracy thing. Is that even realistic on a global scale?
Well, your sources seem to think it has potential. Imagine, instead of just voting every few years, you could log into some secure platform. And you could weigh in on global policies, propose solutions, even vote directly on issues.
It's like a global town hall meeting, but online.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And because it's digital, it could potentially bypass a lot of the gridlock and bureaucracy of traditional government. At least that's the hope.
I mean, it sounds great in theory, but could it actually work in practice? That's a whole other question.
It's a huge experiment with a lot of unknowns, which I think is what this whole deep dive comes down to. A massive, fascinating thought experiment. We've gone from like the structural nuts and bolts of what a world government might look like to these radical economic models. We even touched on some spiritual beliefs about humanity's future. It's a lot to process.
You can say that again. It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
I think that's the point, isn't it? To get us thinking about these big questions.
Yeah, for sure. I started out this deep dive pretty skeptical, I'm not going to lie. But now I'm not sure what to think. I mean, the challenges are massive, maybe even insurmountable. But the potential benefits, if we could actually pull this off, that's pretty incredible too.
And I think that's what your sources are trying to do, spark a conversation. They're not saying this is the solution,
Yeah.
but they're putting these ideas out there, highlighting the opportunities and the potential pitfalls, and inviting us all to grapple with these really big questions. What kind of future do we want? And what role are we willing to play in creating it?
Well said. And on that note, a huge thank you to you